The discussion of mandatory minimum sentences has caught the attention of numerous human rights advocates. It also caught the eye of documentary film producer David Kuhn. He recently made a film about mandatory minimum sentences in relation to drug crimes. Here's a sneak peek at the film titled The House I Live In.
The war against drugs is heating up.
I think they should have wrote prison guard on my forehead when I was born because it just fits me.
I say he's a criminal. Let him go to prison.
I have a life and 30-year sentence.
20 years for drug trafficking. I have life without parole for 3 ounces of methamphetamine.
Of the 2,600 people I've sent to federal prison, I've seen 3 or 4 kingpins. We're incarcerating poor people who are drug addicts.
You're watching poor, uneducated people be fed into a machine like meat to make sausage.
The documentary recently won the 2012 Grand Jury Prize at the Sundance Film Festival. And producer David Kuhn joins me now to talk more about the film. Welcome, sir.
Megan, thanks for having me.
All right, so first off, explain a little bit more about mandatory sentencing and why it's such a problem right now.
Well, you heard Julie Stewart in the segment you ran there say when you put someone in jail from a family, you affect the whole family. And part of what's happening is people are being put away for a long time for drug offenses. We think it's a health problem more than a punishment problem. When you have mandatory minimums, you take away discretion from the court or the system itself, and you remove the ability to treat it like a health problem and say, well, this person has to get 10 years or this person has to get 20 years. And they go away for a long time, and we don't really fix the problem. We're just stuck with a result, and it's not working.
Okay, so let's talk about who the people being sentenced are and also how long the sentences usually range from.
It can be any number of duration, but the problem are the long ones. You know, you can be put in jail for life for possessing drugs. In California recently, there was a change in the 3 strikes law. It used to be, before this recent election, that you could go to jail for life in prison for the rest of your life for a drug possession, a nonviolent offense, a petty offense. Now the law has changed. It has to be a violent offense for your 3rd offense to receive a life sentence. At least that makes a little more sense. You know, so now the drug offenders are not in that category of life in prison. That's a severe penalty for an addict. So there must be a better solution, and we have to find it.
Okay, and we know that the sentences are disproportionately applied to people of color. How?
Well, originally drug laws, if you see the movie, The House I Live In, the drug laws were targeted towards ethnic minorities. Originally, and we didn't know about this until we researched the film and got into it and spent 4 years making the movie in 20 different states, but Eugene Jarecki learned that originally it was the Chinese that were targeted for their use of opium. And in California, the Chinese immigrants were coming in and they were a cheap labor pool, and the people that were making the laws didn't like that. And so they said, well, how can we remove that cheap labor pool? And we can't arrest people for being Chinese, but we can arrest them for using a substance that is associated with the Chinese, and that was opium. And so it went. Crack was associated with black people. We know that 14% of the crack users, 14% of the drug users in America are black people. 14% of the crack users are black people. That means that, by definition, the majority of crack users are white people. That's not the story that's been told in the media, and that's not where law enforcement is targeted. So there's been this racial bias from the beginning on how drug laws have been enforced.
Okay, and let's talk about what inspired you to make this film. How did you come upon this data in the first place?
Well, Eugene Jarecki is a social issues documentary filmmaker, so he makes movies about issues. This issue was important to him because someone in his life, Nanny Jeter, which you see in the movie, is a black woman who was a caretaker in his home. And Eugene is very close to her. It's like a second mother to him. And he learned of her experience and her family's experience and wanted to tell the story of black families in America. A severe impact on black families in America are the drug policies of America. And Eugene saw a story much different than his own. So he wanted to get at that, and he delved into it for 4 years and, as I said, traveled across the country and met a lot of people and wanted to tell that story.
Now, the crux of the argument that your documentary makes is against drug offenders, minor drug offenders. But obviously, mandatory minimum sentences face a lot of people for a variety of crimes. Mm-hmm. Are you saying that you want to outrule all mandatory minimum sentences, or are you more focused on the drug sentencing in particular?
We're particularly concerned about drug sentencing. I think that any time you remove discretion from a sentencing dialogue, it's dangerous. I think it's important to have guidelines. I think it's important to guide ourselves in the right direction. But to say that you can't use your judgment if you're a judge, which is supposed to be what you're there to do, that's dangerous. particularly when it comes to drugs. So we're focused on drugs. I think we could take a look at mandatory sentences in general, though. We're not against punishment for deserving cases, but there needs to be some discretion.
Okay, so let's talk about, we only have about a minute left, but I have to ask you, talk about the cost impacts of minimum mandatory sentencing. You talked about it at the beginning a little bit. Obviously, It affects the families. Does it also affect the prison system?
$1 trillion have been spent in the last 40 years on incarcerating 45 million arrested people, 2.5 million people are in prison. That's a lot of money. Some of that money should be used towards rehabilitation. It should be towards guiding these people back into a productive life, back into their families, back into communities where they can be a contributing, if you want to be crass, a taxpayer, but, and that can help everybody. We're spending a lot of money on incarceration, and municipalities are going bankrupt. So we need to direct that money towards rehabilitation, and in the end, spending a little towards that now saves a lot in the long run.
David Kuhn, producer of The House I Live In. I know that your documentary is also available on iTunes, on demand, and on Amazon. And I know you're going to be screening it tonight at the Shiloh Baptist Church. Thank you so much for taking a little bit of time out of your day before the screening to come in and talk about this.
It's tomorrow, and thanks for having me. Thanks, Susan. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much.